Hey guys, we're going to go ahead and get started on some intro notes specifically for Romeo and Juliet. It has some key terms and some other stuff going on in there. So the first thing you need to do is actually open up the R&J Intro Doodle Notes. Those are on Canvas under the Week 12 module under the Wednesday plan. So if you open them up, I'll just show you real quick what that looks like. It's going to load for a second, but there you go. It should be these. You'll figure it out. And so fill them out in the way that makes sense to you. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, here we go. So we're going to start our intro notes here. You might want to do split screen, or if you have a printer at home, maybe print out the intro notes. This is a good idea to have, especially long term, because these are some things that we're going to be returning to and probably get, have some quizzes or tests and such on them. Okay, or at least quizzes. I don't know how I'm going to do tests. I haven't figured all that out yet. All right, here we go. So starting with Shakespeare, a little bit more about his early life. I know we already went over this a little bit in a different video, but a little bit about his early life. He was born in Stratford-upon-Avon. That is where he kind of grew up, and then also he returned there. He ended his life there as well. Made it sound like he did it himself. Sorry, he didn't. But that is where his life ended. Okay. Stratford is like the name of the city or a little area, and then upon Avon. Avon is the river. So that just so you know. He had a grammar school education. That meant he went to school for 9 hours a day and 6 days a week. As I said the other day too, he also probably was engaged in an apprenticeship of some sort. And he has no record of university, which makes his plays and his use of language all the more impressive. Here's actually a picture of Stratford-upon-Avon, so you can see the river there. That's the Avon River. And then Stratford is very, very beautiful, very, very green. You can see a steeple in the upper right-hand corner. That was probably, I think that's a steeple of the Holy Trinity Church. Really, really beautiful river as well. You can see maybe behind one of the bridges, you can see like a little tiny boat going on there. It's really cool. This is what Stratford kind of looks like in the kind of central town area. And one of those buildings, I want to say, no, actually that I don't, yeah, I think that is one of the buildings. The closest building I think is the one where Shakespeare lived. I could be wrong though. I might be wrong on that picture. The Holy Trinity Church, that would have been where he was both baptized, and it is where he is currently buried today. It's a really cool church. I actually have been there. They're really, really nice people. It's still an operating church as well, so kind of cool. They any money that you give them, like for entering the church and seeing Shakespeare's grave, they actually use towards missions. It's really kind of a cool church. So I really enjoyed my time there. I got to see where he was graved, or where he was not graved, where he was buried. Additionally, he has a really interesting curse on his grave. It was really, really common in those days if there were too many bones and bodies within the church itself, they would actually move the bodies. And Shakespeare placed a curse on his bones and said, basically, you're cursed if you move my bones. So nobody moved them, and part of that's probably because he's Shakespeare, but part of it maybe has to do with his curse. All right, so Shakespeare's theater, we talked a little bit about this already, but let's keep going here. When a playwright would write plays, he would write for a specific group of actors. Remember, those were called a troupe. Okay, theater in general was frowned upon, so they needed sponsors. Again, like I said the other day, if you were an actor, you were essentially a servant of some sort of nobility. His troupe, actually was first the Lord Chamberlain's men, and then his second troupe was the King's men, and that meant that King James was his sponsor. That was his nobility, his person of nobility that he was a servant of. So there you go. In Shakespeare's time, there were no women allowed on stage. And so if you've seen the movie Shakespeare in Love, that would have never, ever happened. But yeah, women were not allowed on stage. And so again, young boys would actually play the roles of women, which is why you would not see a whole lot of love scenes like on stage, or you wouldn't see a whole lot of kissing or anything like that either. Additionally, you would not have any sets. The stage itself is the set, and so the audience would have to use their imagination, as would, of course, the actors actors. Rhyming often indicated a change of scene or speaker. Sometimes it would indicate a lower class. I know that I said, or you watched the video the other day that said, what did it say? Oh, the verse was typically reserved for the upper class, but sometimes they would overdo it in order to emphasize the lower class and their kind of silliness. Okay. Some terms you should know for the theater itself. Sorry for the awful pixelated picture there. But for the theater itself, that is called the Globe Theater. Okay. And I don't know if I actually don't know if there's a connection to this, but Shakespeare did in one of his plays say all the world's a stage. So it's interesting that his theater would be called the Globe Theater because in some ways it encapsulates or it captures a lot of what's going on in the world. And so, you know, themes that are so universal like love and jealousy and rage and all sorts of things. That's real world stuff. And so it's interesting it's called the Globe Theater because Shakespeare himself said the world is a stage and we're all actors. And so I think there's a connection there. I don't know that it was related when they initially named it, but kind of a fun connection there. It was also called the Wooden O, okay, because it was shaped like an O or a circle. This is what it would look like on the inside, and this is what it looks like today. Obviously, these people are from today. So you'd have kind of 3 tiers of seats, and those were the people that paid a little bit more money if you got a seat. You could also buy a cushion to sit on because those benches were wooden. And then right in the front, you see all those people standing. Those were called the groundlings. So you would pay obviously a lot less to stand in the front. That was usually people of lower class that were coming to be a groundling. I'll say I got to go see a play while I was in London, and it was really, really cool. I sat on the bottom tier of the seats. I was so glad that I chose the seats instead of paying less to be a groundling. Because what ended up happening is this is an open air theater, so there's actually no roof over where the groundlings are. And the day that I went, during Act 4, well, it was a play of Macbeth, during Act 4, started pouring rain. Like, I don't think I've ever seen rain that hard. It was pouring rain. And so by Act 5, all the groundlings were gone because they were just so drenched. Additionally, another interesting fact, so since you're standing for an entire play as a groundling, people would actually faint. So while I was there, even though it wasn't even hot, you know, like when you lock your knees, sometimes you faint. I guess some people were locking their knees, and I actually saw multiple people go down. And the Globe Theater today is really, really good about this. They have like a medical team on standby to literally go in and like extract the person that fainted, and then the play just continues as if nothing happened. So I saw, I think, like 4 or 5 people faint during the play. And like I said, it was raining, so it's not like it was hot or anything. So kind of crazy. There's kind of another image of the globe, or kind of a diagram of the globe. Again, you can see where the groundlings would stand there. The galleries were kind of where the seats were. Again, I was so glad that I paid for a seat. The musicians gallery you can see right above there. So they did have music during the plays. In fact, that was part of the entertainment as well. The tower up at the top, that's where you would see the flag being waved, whether it was white or red or black, depending on whether it was a comedy or a history or a tragedy. Okay. One other thing I thought would be kind of interesting to point out is the upper stage there. Sometimes, especially if it was not going to be used in the play itself, sometimes the really, really rich people would actually sit up there. And so they were actually sitting on stage. And the whole idea behind that is if they're really, really noble, then they wanted to be seen. So if they're going to the theater, then they would dress up and make sure they looked really, really good. And they would enjoy the fact that they were being seen by the entire audience by sitting on the upper stage. So sometimes that worked, sometimes it didn't. Now today, if you go to London, they don't allow you to sit up there anymore. I think that's probably too distracting. All right, so some types of Shakespearean plays. The first one is comedy. In a comedy, the audience should experience joy and happiness and laughter. And a comedy traditionally always ends in marriage. And that's actually more of a Greek thing, but same thing with Shakespearean plays. So comedy, audience experiences joy, and it ends in marriage. Tragedy, on the other hand, the audience should experience grief and sadness and pain and kind of these deep-seated emotions. And as I think we're probably already familiar with, tragedies end with death, okay, and lots of it, okay. Histories were a little different. Histories were retelling of major events in English history, or other histories as well, but usually English histories. The interesting thing about Romeo and Juliet, it is not considered a history, it's considered a tragedy. However, there are some historical roots within the play. The Capulets and the Montagues, those are the two rival families in Romeo and Juliet. Their kind of feud is very, very similar to real life English history in the War of the Roses, where there was the House of Lancaster, so there was one family, and the House of York were at odds with one another, and it was pretty serious stuff. Histories typically have the elements of both comedy and tragedy because it is not quite so black and white in real life. And so if it's based on a history, it's based on real life. So there you go. Romeo and Juliet actually in some ways does have some comedic qualities and attributes to it as well. But it is ultimately a tragedy, as you will find out. So there are a couple types of tragedy. One is tragedy by fate, and Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy by fate. They are described as star-crossed lovers. People, especially in those days, believed that depending on the position of the stars, when you were born, or I don't know, you know the whole astrology stuff, they believed that the positions of the stars kind of would determine your fate in life. And so to say that these two lovers were star-crossed meant that their stars, the position of the stars for them, was not in a good position for them, which meant that they were kind of doomed from the start. Okay, so that would mean, again, that the outcome or destiny is by chance or bad timing. Okay, it was not necessarily their fault, but although it is, but we'll get to that later. The events are outside the control of the characters in a tragedy by fate. Again, I already talked about the star-crossed lovers thing, but again, that just means it is not favored by the stars, or just in general, it's ill-fated, okay? That there are powers that be far above them that had decided before they could even make the decision that this was not going to work, okay? So sorry, Romeo and Juliet, not going to work out for you. The other type of tragedy that's really important is a tragedy by tragic flaw. Romeo and Juliet is also a tragedy by tragic flaw. That is in which the character's traits lead to his or her own downfall. Some flaws found in Romeo and Juliet, I'm sure there are more, but here are kind of the big five. Romeo and Juliet are both very impatient. Okay, very, very impatient. They rush into things. Another one is pride, and this is a big one for Romeo, and it's also a big one for some of the other characters, like Tybalt, and well, we'll get to all those later. Anger, same thing. Allowing anger to get the best of you is a tragic flaw found in Romeo and Juliet. Disobedience. These kids are not obedient to the powers that they should be, and now you can argue whether or not they should be, but ultimately they are not obedient, and that does lead to their downfall. And then finally, secrecy. As you guys will find out, I'm sure, there are a lot of secrets kept in Romeo and Juliet, and it doesn't work well for them. I'll just say that. Okay, some terms that you need to know and remember. The first one is iambic pentameter, and when we come back from spring break, I'll talk more about this. But iambic pentameter, these are the things you need to know at this point. 10 syllables, okay, per line. Okay, and then it follows a pattern of one stressed syllable, and then, one unstressed syllable, and then one stressed syllable. Okay, so the way you mark it looks like this. There's kind of like a little, I don't know what you call that, little kind of half circle. That marks the unstressed syllables, and then the kind of slash, it's like an accent, that marks the stressed syllables. So it sounds like lub-dub, 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 dub-dub, dub-dub. I didn't do that very well, but you guys get the idea. So again, if we were to mark this bottom line, which this is the very first line of Romeo and Juliet, the very first line of the prologue, says, "To house holds both alike in dignity." Okay, and so you would mark it in that way. "To house holds both alike in dignity." Okay, and I think in the video you watched, it said it kind of mirrors the heartbeat. Da-dum, 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 da-dum. Okay, and so there's 10 of them. There are what are called 5 iambs. It's called iamb because that's the combination of an unstressed syllable and a stressed syllable. So that's one iamb. Okay, and pentameter, you guys know the word pentagon, that means it has 5 sides. So pentameter means there are 5 of them. So if we have an iamb, a single iamb is a combination of unstressed and stressed syllables. You've got 5 combinations of unstressed to stressed syllables. Okay, so again, da-dum, 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 da-dum. That makes 5. In total, you have 10 syllables, but it's really you have 5 iambs, which is a combination of 2 syllables. Okay. Some other terms you need to know. The next one is blank verse, not to be confused with free verse, which we'll talk about in a second, but blank verse is unrhymed iambic pentameter, and that is what is used to write the bulk of Shakespeare's plays. He loves iambic pentameter, so he doesn't get himself away from that meter very often, but he doesn't always rhyme it. Now in the prologue, as you guys saw, or we'll see soon, yeah, we'll see soon, it will be rhymed. However, it's not always rhymed, and so in that case, it's blank verse. Again, don't get it confused with free verse. Free verse would be no rhyme and no meter. Blank verse has a meter, but no rhyme. Okay. Next one is a Shakespearean sonnet. Okay, so you probably have heard of a sonnet before. You guys know it's a type of poem. Here are some more specific details that make a sonnet Shakespearean. First of all, it is 14 lines, and the prologue of Romeo and Juliet is written in a Shakespearean sonnet format. So there are 14 lines to start the play. It is written in iambic pentameter, so Shakespearean sonnet is also written in iambic pentameter. There is also a set structure and a set rhyme. Okay, so the set structure has to do with the amount of lines and how they're broken up. It starts with 4 lines, and 4 lines together, that's called a quatrain. Okay, so it starts with the first 4 lines, and that's where you get your first idea. The second 4 lines, or your second quatrain, is your second idea. The third 4 lines, or your third quatrain, is your third idea. And then the sonnet will end with what's called a couplet. That's 2 lines, and that kind of summarizes what we've been talking about. Okay, the rhyme scheme is written in A, B, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, E, F. GG, okay? So what it means to do A, B, A, B, I'm going to show you right now. The first line is your A line. Your second line is your B line. Your third line goes back to A, and your fourth line goes back to B. So if you notice, the first and third lines, let's look at them. They end on dignity and mutiny. So dignity, mutiny, A and A, because they rhyme together, okay? Lines 2 and 4, seen and unclean. Those 2 words rhyme together as well, so that's your B rhyme, okay? So the A rhyme is dignity and mutiny. Your B rhyme is seen and unclean. Notice they alternate, which is why we go A, B, A, B. The same thing happens in the second and third quatrains, and then you'll see at the very end, and I'm sorry that it got cut off down at the bottom, but you'll see the end couplet, they just rhyme together. There's no alternating, okay? So attend and mend, that's why it's GG instead of GH, okay? So I hope that kind of makes sense. This is something I'll want you to know how to mark, just like I'll want you to know how to mark the syllable stressings in iambic pentameter. Some themes you should be aware of in Romeo and Juliet. First one is impetuousness of youth. That means kind of impatience. It's doing something quickly and without thought of consequences. And so one of the themes is how the impetuousness of youth can lead to unfortunate consequences. The second one is ancient grudges or feuds can cause waste and or heartbreak. Okay, so let stuff go, man. Okay, that's one of the themes. And then the third one, humans cannot escape their fate. As we talked about, this is a tragedy by tragedy. It's a tragedy by fate, in which we are kind of powerless in. Okay, so if it's already been predetermined that it's not going to go well, then it's just not going to go well. Okay, so those are a few themes that you should know. Sorry. You also should know the term character foil. I have a definition there, but I kind of like another one better. But here it is: a character that highlights through contrast another character's qualities or attitudes. When I talk about character foils, I think of 2 characters that disagree on a particular topic. Okay, so there's got to be some specific topic in which they disagree on. And maybe there's multiple specific topics, but there has to be at least one specific topic that they disagree on. We will see that in Act 1 because some character foils get established pretty early on in this play. Next one you should know is comic relief. That is a humorous character or scene that lightens the seriousness or emotional intensity of a tragedy. If a playwright were just to write tragedy for the entire time and it's just all downhill and it's all just downer stuff, the audience might kind of start to disconnect, right? They might kind of go, oh gosh, this is a bummer. They might not necessarily enjoy the play. And so comic relief is really, really important. It actually helps the reader stay engaged with the tragedy, ironically. Some character types. Well, first of all, the tragic hero. That is the main character of a tragedy, and that person suffers from a tragic flaw. A tragic flaw would be a personality weakness or, kind of downside that causes the hero to make unfortunate decisions. Those consequences end up kind of driving the plot. It leads to the destruction in the end. Okay, we talked about this when we read Antigone. How I think they call it in Greek hamartia or hamartia. I'm not sure. Either way, remember we talked about that too. But essentially, either way, it is that that flaw of the person that leads to their own downfall. Okay. In the Greeks, and in general, one of the most common hamartias or tragic flaws was hubris. Remember, kind of a sense of pride. Now the Greeks look at that a little bit differently, but for us, for the most part, hubris would kind of just be a sense of pride, over excessive pride. Dramatic speech. So there are a couple different types of speeches that you need to be aware of. The first one's easy. It's a dialogue. You guys know what dialogue is. It's a conversation between two or more characters or two or more people. Right now, you and I are not having a dialogue because I'm the one talking and you guys are the one listening. Okay, so it's not a back and forth. A dialogue is a conversation between two people. And we're just not having that. I'm sorry. Monologue is what we're doing, okay? It is a long speech made by one character. So I do have an audience, hopefully. This is a digital audience. You guys are behind a screen for me. But I am the one speaking solely, and I'm speaking kind of at you, okay? That is a monologue. And there are some monologues in Romeo and Juliet. One of my favorite ones is by one of my favorite characters named Mercutio, and we'll explore that a little bit later. Sorry, my dog's about to bark. Shh. Okay, and so that's a monologue. That is often confused, or I guess the next one is often confused with monologue, and that is a soliloquy. Both are delivered by one character, okay, so both are speeches made by one character, but a soliloquy is one that is delivered by a character and they are alone on stage and they are speaking their thoughts aloud and they don't think they have an audience. Okay, so the big difference between a monologue and a soliloquy, a monologue, the character knows they have an audience and they are talking to a group of people or one person. It's a very extended, long speech by one person, but they have an audience. In a soliloquy, the assumption by the character is, I don't have an audience, I'm just talking aloud, okay, or I'm thinking aloud. All right, and then the last one is an aside. That is a statement made by a character in a play intended to be heard by an audience, by the audience of the actual production, right? But not by the other characters, okay? So an aside would be kind of like our version of breaking the fourth wall, right? Where the character is actually aware that there's, an audience seeing a play here, and so they would kind of go off to the side and kind of whisper off to the audience what they want to say, but the assumption is the other characters don't hear it. Okay? So I think that's it for today. Thanks, and hang on to these notes because you will want to refer back to them as we start doing some work with Romeo and Juliet. Bye-bye.